Hello and welcome to our look at chapter 27. Today we're going to be taking a look at World War II. So we last left off with Hitler coming to power in Germany. And again, one of the first things he's going to implement is this idea of living space for the German people. And he's going to eye westward expansion to make this happen. But the question becomes, how is Hitler even able to do this, right? We learned about the Treaty of Versailles. We learned about reparations. The whole idea was to weaken Germany to a point where German aggression was never actually possible. So again, in what way is Hitler going to grow Germany to create World War II? First thing we see is in 1935. Hitler blatantly says, I'm going to increase the size of my army. I'm going to now create an air force called the Luftwaffe within Germany. And again, European countries see this. They know this is in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles, and they choose to do nothing. Part of that is, again, we're still only 15 years out from World War I. There's still a lot of kind of trepidation about further conflict. Some of it is, quite frankly, that the countries in Europe who could enforce this aren't militarily strong enough to actually do anything about it. So again, Hitler breaks the Treaty of Versailles, and there's no punishment, which is only going to encourage him to continue to do so. 1936, Hitler is going to reoccupy the Rhineland, which is this border area between France and Germany. Again, German troops are not supposed to be there. Again, if they're there, that makes it really easy to attack France. But again, now he has troops there. And again, Europe doesn't really do anything, right? They kind of wag the finger, they scold them, they say, hey, knock it off. But there's no actual punishment or reason for him not to continue. Also, earlier in 1936, we see Hitler and Mussolini kind of forging this friendship that we're going to see continue on into World War II. All right, 1938, we see continued German aggression. The Nazis are going to put a sympathetic chancellor in charge of Austria, at which point Germany is going to show up in Austria, and the chancellor is just going to say, hey, come on in. At which point we see Germany and Austria unify. And again, European countries do absolutely nothing to stop this. Their argument is, look, if Austria wants to be part of Germany, who are we to stop this? Again, not looking at the bigger picture that is simply just Hitler growing his strength. The next place that Hitler is going to turn his eye to is the country of Czechoslovakia. Now, again, Czechoslovakia as a country has only existed since the end of World War I. Again, we talked about self-determination and the 14 points from Woodrow Wilson. But Czechoslovakia is going to be a little bit trickier. One, they do have a legitimate military. They have a legitimate defense network. The country is very mountainous. It makes very limited accessibility points. Again, Czechoslovakia can legitimately put up a fight. The other thing or reason why this might be difficult is Czechoslovakia is genuinely friends with other countries. They're friends with the Soviet Union. They're friends with France. So again, if Hitler were to attack Czechoslovakia, there is the chance of starting a new war, which he's quite frankly not ready to fight or maybe even capable of winning at this time. So Hitler just verbally says, I want to take a slice of Czechoslovakia. Now, of course, Czechoslovakia responds with a no, we're not interested in giving up any of our country. Now, Hitler argues that the Sunderland, kind of this border region between Czechoslovakia and Germany, is really part of Germany, or it should be part of Germany. Again, there are literally millions of people living there who are ethnically German. Like, why should they be forced to be part of Czechoslovakia? Why can't they just be part of Germany? And again, Hitler says, look, that's all I want. I just want to unify the German people together. Right? At which point in time, the major European leaders decide, we've had enough, we need to talk about this. And they have a meeting in Munich. And again, all the major leaders of Europe show up there, and what they basically decide is, we're going to give Hitler what he wants. We're going to do appeasement, is our word for this. All right, we're going to give him this small little bit of Czechoslovakia, and in exchange, Hitler promises that's all he needs. He's literally done. He's unified Austria and Germany. He's got all the ethnic Germans of Czechoslovakia back underneath his wing. Again, if we agree to this, Hitler promises to not be aggressive in Europe anymore. It turns out Hitler lies, right? But again, the European countries want to believe this because they, quite frankly, don't want conflict. All right, next Germany is going to, they do eventually take all of Czechoslovakia, by the way, but the next major place that Germany is going to eye is Poland. Again, they need living space. They need a place to be able to, farm and mass produce agricultural goods to supply all the Aryans that that Hitler plans on having to, again, become the supreme world leaders. So again, they begin to eye Poland, but Great Britain and France finally put their foot down. They say, look, Hitler, enough is enough. You said you weren't going to be aggressive anymore. We see you sizing up Poland. We are telling you now that, quite frankly, you cannot touch Poland. Right? So again, we kind of have this line in the sand now, right? This ultimatum. Don't touch Poland or else. Right? So one of the other reasons why Hitler is able to get away with some of these things is he's acting as a buffer zone, right? Countries in Europe are scared of Soviet Union expansion. So again, if you have this strong Germany in between France and the Soviet Union, in between Great Britain and the Soviet Union, again, he's acting as a buffer zone. All right, but one of the things that Hitler does to kind of circumvent this idea of this ultimatum is he actually becomes friends with the Soviet Union. So again, even though Hitler is an ardent anti-communist, even though Hitler completely badmouths the Soviet Union, what we find is that they sign a non-aggression pact. They will not attack each other. But no one in Europe knew this. The fine print of that agreement said Germany will attack Poland. And once they do, the Soviet Union can attack Poland, and they'll just divide Poland in half. Again, unbeknownst to the rest of Europe, they've already plotted out exactly how World War II is going to begin. So, on September 1st, right, Germany invades Poland. Again, completely violating the ultimatum that France and Great Britain lay down, at which point France and Great Britain declare war on Germany. We've now officially begun World War II. So again, it takes about 2 days from the invasion of Poland for that declaration of war. Now, as we mentioned, that non-aggression pact allows the Soviet Union to invade, which they do by September 17th. So again, Germany is definitely the aggressor here. But again, keep in mind, the Soviet Union does the exact same thing, invading Poland just literally 2 weeks later. And that little fact's going to be glossed over as World War II continues. Now, Europe is not the only place we're seeing conflict during this time. There is strife around the world, specifically in Asia. What we find is that some economic issues in Japan in the 1930s lead to an increased military control of the country. Again, they have an emperor that's theoretically the person that should be in charge. But again, the military is really going to take over what Japan is doing. Once the military comes to power, they want to use the military. So 1931, they invade Manchuria. 1937, they officially declare war on China, and that is going to rage throughout the rest of the 30s into the 40s. Specifically, in 1937, they also capture the Chinese capital, which at that time is Nanjing. And again, there's mass murders, mass rapings, again, a slaughter of people inside that city. Now, Japan is also interested in attacking the Soviet Union. They'd like to take over all of Siberia. They're kind of friends with Germany, but once Germany and the Soviet Union signed that non-aggression pact, there's no way that Germany would side with Japan. So again, Japan is going to have to look elsewhere to continue their expansion and continue to collect natural resources. So they're going to begin to look to southern Asia. And again, their ultimate goal there is to take the colonies that exist away from places like America, away from European countries, and let them be their colonies, right? So again, this idea of Asia for Asians is what Japan is going to push for. Now, once Japan starts to get very aggressive in this region, the U.S. responds by cutting off economic trade with Japan. So there are certain things we are simply not going to give the Japanese anymore. And again, this really backs them in the corner. They're running low on steel. They're running low on oil, gas, supplies of that nature. And again, we're going to see Japan lash out because of that. Now, war in World War II looks vastly different than war we have ever seen before, and that's because the Germans institute something called Blitzkrieg. Now, Blitzkrieg is using things like armored division, tanks, cars, motorcycles, things that can move really, really fast. The idea is speed. You quickly surround your enemy, you force their surrender, then your standard on-the-ground soldiers show up and occupy the territory you have just taken. This is why Poland is going to fall in months. Again, you have Germany attacking one side, you have the Soviet Union attacking from the other side. While France and Great Britain have declared war, they're not going to send any supplies or anything to Poland. Poland is literally just chalked up as a lost cause. Now, by spring of 1940, Hitler renews his attacks. He takes the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and then he is eventually going to invade France. Now, on paper, the French and British forces that are in France, statistically speaking, should be able to put up a good fight. Soldier for soldier, they have the same number of men, they have the same number of tanks, but what we find is that they're literally no match. France falls by June, they literally fall within months of the invasion. So really the only major European country we even have left that isn't friends with Hitler or invaded by Hitler is going to be Great Britain at that point in time. But again, Great Britain has the greatest defense that there is, and that is they're an island. There's literally no way to blitzkrieg into Great Britain unless you invade. And in order to invade, you must control the skies. And that's where we're going to see the Battle of Britain ensuing. So again, you have the German Air Force dropping bombs, trying to knock the British out of the war. You have the British countering this. And obviously, Great Britain is able to prevail. A few things help them do this. One, they're quite frankly just stubborn people, right? No matter how many bombs are dropped on them that night, they're going to wake up the next morning and go right back to work and just do their thing. The next is they simply have good airplanes. They're able to match the German Luftwaffe plane for plane, pilot for pilot. The other thing is technology. Britain has a very rudimentary form of radar that allows them to know when and where German planes are coming from. They're able to be there, kind of counterattack. And again, this is really going to stop Germany from being able to win the skies over Britain. It's also at this point in time when Hitler starts to get a little bit frustrated with what's going on, it's not happening fast enough, that we see Hitler stop bombing military targets and start to attack cities. And this is actually really good for Great Britain. It sounds terrible to have your cities bombed, but they were actually slowing down military production. They weren't able to keep up with what Germany was able to produce. But once Hitler changes to bombing cities, all those factories can gear back up. They're able to mass produce, and they're able to, again, match Germany on the production end. It's also at this time that Hitler starts to look for other places to attack, right? He knows he's really never going to be able to get in Great Britain, so he's going to eye the Mediterranean, right? We still have lots of British colonies in that region. That's a great way to attack Britain and kind of weaken them as a whole. So he encourages / allows the Italians to begin a war in northern Africa. And what the Italians soon prove is they're basically useless when it comes to military affairs. So then the Nazis have to then go into North Africa and kind of pick up the slack. Now, again, as Hitler, again, wins in Europe, starts to win in North Africa, he decides that now is the time to attack the Soviet Union. So, again, even though they have a non-aggression pact, all right, Hitler is going to obviously break that pact and invade the Soviet Union. But there is a catch. He'd planned to invade the Soviet Union in the spring. But because he has to constantly help the Italians, he doesn't actually invade until June. And again, just that 2 to 3 week, month-long window there is going to be the difference in success. Now, when the Nazis invade Russia, they're incredibly successful right off the bat. They take over 2 million Soviet soldiers prisoner. They cover hundreds of miles of land. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything, right? You're just conquering open fields, and you're conquering a bunch of soldiers that can quickly be replaced because Russia is the most populous country in Europe. They're not actually taking anything worthwhile. They can't take Leningrad. They can't take Moscow. Again, they get to the doorsteps, but winter sets in. And again, it's an extremely cold winter, and this is really what we would consider the high water mark of Germany. This is as close as they ever come to winning World War II. The other major thing that's going to occur in the winter, or the start of the winter of 1941, is obviously Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941, Japan decides to attack Pearl Harbor. Again, we've kind of boxed them into a corner with our economic sanctions. This is their response. Now, Japan knows that they can't win a war with the U.S. on a war scale, right? We're a large country. We can mass produce things. They're never going to be able to keep up. The idea is that America is so far away. If they attack us at Pearl Harbor, if they take out our Navy, if they sink our aircraft carriers, it's going to take us forever to rebuild. And then we really have no way of counterattacking, right? We're talking about thousands of miles of distance from the closest U.S. military base to Japan. How are we going to respond? How are we going to fight back? So again, the idea is that they're going to drag this war out. They're going to make it so difficult and so costly that America's eventually going to surrender. We're eventually going to give up. So it's not so much that we're going to lose the war. We're just going to lose interest in the war, and that's how Japan plans to win. Now, a side note here. Japan attacks America, but Germany declares war on America. Right? Again, Germany didn't have to do this. Japan and Germany, while being friends, was kind of a defensive alliance. If you're attacked, I'll help you. Japan's not attacked. Japan is the aggressor, yet Germany still declared war on America, which is going to be a major problem here. All right, so now we have the three major allies. We have Great Britain, we have the Soviet Union, and we have America. All right, they're going to sit down and talk and decide that Germany is the greatest evil here. We're obviously at war with Japan as well, but we are going to concentrate on Germany. The thing we are going to demand is unconditional surrender. The mistake we learned in World War I was basically letting Germany end the war on their own terms, right? Yeah, there's a Treaty of Versailles. Yes, they have to pay reparations, but Germany really never learned a lesson. Germany, the country, was never invaded in World War I. That's not going to be the case. The only thing we will accept is unconditional surrender. Now, the U.S. is obviously still very far away from Europe, but we're able to send lots of supplies. We send millions of dollars of supplies to the Soviet Union. Again, they don't necessarily have the ability to mass produce these things like we do. They have the soldiers. They're on the ground. They can do the fighting. We can do the supplying, and that is exactly what is going to happen. All right, now, Germany is still having lots of success, though. The Soviet Union isn't really fighting back. Germany is still having lots of success in North Africa, and U-boat attacks are slowing down the amount of supplies that are getting into Great Britain. So again, as 1942 begins, Germany is still looking very successful. But we begin to see our turning point. First off, the Germans are defeated in North Africa. American and British forces invade. They're able to force the Nazis in North Africa to surrender. Next thing we see is the Battle of Stalingrad. Stalingrad is a major production city along the Volga River in Russia. The Germans invade, they attack. They're never able to completely take and hold the city, and Germany is going to lose 300,000 soldiers in just that single battle alone. And from here on out, Germany's never really able to mount an offensive. Again, the war's going to drag out for almost 3 more years, but it really from here on out is Germany slowly retreating. Again, they're not the aggressor. They're not able to do the blitzkrieg style attacks that made them so successful to begin with. Over in the Asian area of the war, we see the Battle of the Coral Sea, which stops a proposed invasion of Australia. We also see the Battle of Midway, where Japan is going to lose 4 aircraft carriers. From here on out, Japan is no longer going to be able to be aggressive. And again, the U.S. is using what's called an island hopping campaign. We can't go from our bases right to Japan. There's simply no way to move those supplies. So we're simply working our way slowly across the Pacific, taking an island, setting it up as a U.S. military base, working our way to the next island, and so on. In 1943, the Axis forces surrender in North Africa completely. The Allies invade Italy, and Mussolini is disposed. And one of the things that really kind of scars Hitler is what happens to Mussolini. He's found, he's murdered, and he's strung up by his feet at a gas station for all to see and kind of mock. So that's one of the reasons why we see Hitler end his life the way we do. He doesn't want the same fate that occurs to Mussolini. By June of 1944, the Allies are going to launch the D-Day invasion of France. So again, a direct invasion from Great Britain onto French soil. They're going to push the Germans back in France, and by 1945, the Allies are at the German border. So again, the Americans and British are on one side, the Soviets are on the other side. The fall of Nazi Germany is imminent. On the Pacific side, again, we see the island hopping campaign. And again, it's working. We're getting closer and closer and closer. But now we're close enough to decide how we want to end this war, right? And option A is you physically invade Japan just like you're doing to Germany. You force them to unconditionally surrender. But again, judging by how hard it is to take these small little islands in the Pacific, the idea of attacking the entire largest islands of Japan is daunting. It's going to take a lot of men and a lot of supplies, and lots of people are going to lose their lives. Option B, by the spring of 1945, we know that we now have the atomic weapon. Again, the idea that if we can use these weapons on the right targets at the right time, you might be able to force Japan to surrender without actually having to invade the country. Now, what exactly was life like in Europe under Nazi control, right? At one point in time, the Nazis literally control everything from France all the way to the doorsteps of Moscow. Now, this allows them to implement their Aryan ideas. Specifically, all of the people east of Germany that they considered Slavic, they considered them inferior. All these people are going to be uprooted. Their land is going to be given to Germans, which are then turned into these large-scale agricultural farms. Some of the people they're moving into actually would have sided with the Nazis given the option, especially a place like the Ukraine. The people that live in the Ukraine hate the Soviet Union. Had Hitler just showed up and said, I'm liberating you from the Soviet Union, do you want to join the Nazi army and help me attack the Soviet Union? A lot of these places would have said yes. They really didn't like the Soviet Union. But again, this was simply not something Hitler could wrap his mind around. These were Slavic people. These were inferior people. They didn't need their help in order to win. So again, kind of passing up on some opportunities there to actually potentially be more effective in the war. Now, one option for these displaced people was slave labor, and about 7 to 9 million people are going to be brought back into Germany from these places and forced to work on farms, forced to work on factories. So again, conquering these people and then subjugating them to work. Now, we obviously know the greatest tragedy that's going to fall during World War II is the Holocaust. Now, the Holocaust in and of itself starts out as a forced migration program. We simply want the Jews to leave Europe, is what the Nazis are going to do. This becomes what they call mobile killing units. Anytime the Nazis would take a city, these mobile killing units would show up afterwards. They would round up all the Jewish residents of that town. They would drive them to the outskirts of town or the nearest woods, and then they would literally just execute them all. But there's a few problems with that aside from the mass killing of people. One, it's incredibly slow. You're literally rounding up individual people and driving them somewhere. It's not very effective. Two, it's a giant waste of resources, right? You're using tons of soldiers, tons of bullets. It's not a very effective way. Again, if you had to mass murder people, this isn't the way you'd want to do it. Third, it really produces morale issues. Again, a lot of times we think of Nazis as these stone-cold killing machines. They have no remorse, but that's not necessarily the case, right? Your every average-day soldier is willing to kill to defend himself or win a military victory. Most soldiers are not willing to kill innocent men, women, and children, regardless of what their religion or background is. Which leads us to the next thing the Nazis are going to do, and that's what we call the final solution, right? The creation of these death camps where people are gassed and the bodies are burnt in mass graves. 2 out of every 3 Jews that were living in Europe when the war begins will end up being killed during the Holocaust. And keep in mind, it's not just Jews that are killed. Gypsies, people that are physically handicapped, mentally disabled, any of these kinds of people were eligible to be executed under the Nazi regime. Now, Japan, while certainly not running a Holocaust-type system, were not much better when it comes to the way they treated occupied people. Again, mass murders, rape, forced prostitution, forced labor. Again, being conquered by either of these countries was not an enjoyable situation. Now, back here in America, what was it like in the war? Obviously, we're not concerned about invasion. We're not having these types of issues. What we do see, though, is that the American economy really picks up during this time. Again, even though all these men are going off to fight in the war, we see women kind of picking up that slack. America is mass producing 6 warships a day, as well as $6 billion worth of war material every single day in America. And again, we see men going off to war and women really picking up the slack within the economy. We also see many new boom towns created as these factories just simply need to be built and exist. Places that were very kind of small rural areas become much, much larger during this time period as well. You also see a large immigration of African Americans from the South up into northern cities for job opportunities. But again, what many African Americans find is that this racial tension still exists. Yes, there aren't the Jim Crow laws. Yes, there isn't the legal segregation, but there are still tons of racial issues in these northern cities as well. The biggest thing that happens in America comes about because of Executive Order 9066. What that did was basically turn the entire West Coast into a military zone. And it gave the military the ability to remove people from that military zone, specifically Asian Americans. If you had any level of Japanese ancestry or Korean ancestry, America just lumped those two things together, even though they're not even remotely close, you could simply be rounded up and forced to move. Over 110,000 people are going to be rounded up off the west coast of America and put in camps in the interior of America. Again, not concentration camps. They weren't there to murder people. But again, it's certainly not a great condition to be rounding up American citizens and forcing them into these camps. Now, many things that people fear during this time, especially if you're a European or a Japanese city, is bombing, right? So again, Germany begins this method of attack by bombing London. Great Britain responds, and then throughout the rest of the war, the bombing of cities is going to continue. Now, sometimes they're military targets, sometimes they're non-military targets. And the idea is if you bomb cities, again, that's not where the military is. You're fighting a war. Why do you bomb the cities? Because the cities are where things are being produced. If you can destroy the factories, you stop the production, again, you can win the war more quickly. The other thing is simply morale. If you are constantly living in fear of having bombs dropped on you, you're more likely to talk to your government. You're more likely to give up the fight. So again, the idea is to reduce production and to reduce morale. So the question becomes, does it actually work? And the answer is, not really. In fact, we see production in Germany increasing between 42 and 43 when a lot of this bombing is happening. It will eventually slow down into 1944, but at that point in time, there just aren't enough people in Germany to produce goods anyways. So again, it's kind of a yes and no situation. It does certainly slow some things down, but again, it doesn't necessarily work in that fashion. Now, obviously, the greatest example of bombing a city is going to be when America does decide to drop the atomic bombs. Again, first on Hiroshima and then on Nagasaki, where again, not only are thousands killed on impact, but thousands more are going to die from radiation poisoning over time. So, the end of World War II, kind of the numbers, 21 million soldiers are going to end up dead. An additional 40 million civilians are going to end up dead. And again, if you look at those statistics, the Soviet Union really suffers the most as far as men and civilians that are killed. Additionally, millions of people are going to be displaced. They were forced out of their homes because of the war. They might be trying to go back to their homes. And quite frankly, a lot of these cities don't exist. They've been bombed into rubble. So again, you don't really have the ability to go back home. There simply is no home. Some of the other things we're going to see because of World War II, technologies, right? Things like radar, computers, self-propelled rockets, obviously atomic bombs, which turned into atomic energy. So again, all these things come about because of World War II. Now, during the war, the major three allies, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and America, have a few meetings where they try to determine what's going on in the war. The first one's going to take place in Tehran, which is the capital of Iran. That's when they decide that they're going to invade Germany. they're going to decide what to kind of do when they invade Germany, that the one side will attack from one side will attack from the other. And again, they're going to agree to meet in Germany. The second major meeting they have is in Yalta. By the time Yalta occurs, though, the Soviet Union is having much more success, and they're really kind of flexing their muscle. And what they talk about is the idea of having a sphere of influence. This idea that within the past 20 years, Germany has now invaded the Soviet Union, or what would be Russia, twice. The Soviet Union is going to make sure that does not happen a third time. And in order to prevent that from happening, they are going to create a sphere of influence, a group of buffer states between them and Germany to make sure Germany never invades them again. At this meeting, they also agree to form the UN, or the United Nations, which again, ideally would be an organization to prevent future conflicts such as this. The third conference is going to take place in Potsdam. By this point in time, FDR is dead, so America is being represented by Truman. And again, at this point in time, we really start to see both sides kind of sizing each other up. The Nazis have been defeated. The war with Japan is almost over. So what's the next conflict? Because it looks like it's going to be between America and the Soviet Union. Now, at this point in time, we know we have the atomic bomb. They don't know we have the atomic bomb. So again, Truman is able to kind of work from a position of strength, knowing that we have a weapon that they do not possess. A few years later, Churchill is going to describe what the end of World War II means for Europe by describing it that an iron curtain has fallen over Eastern Europe. Again, all of these countries that were supposed to, according to Stalin, have free elections, decide what kind of governments they're going to have, none of that happens. All of these countries are forced into having communist regimes. And again, Stalin gets his sphere of influence, his buffer zone, to make sure he's never invaded from Germany again. So again, that is our look at chapter 27.